The following presentation was recorded live for the International Association of Square Dance Callers 33rd Annual Convention. We take you live to the Renaissance Suites Hotel in Charlotte, North Carolina, where our session is just getting underway.
Hey folks, if you're in here and the session is They're Not Dancing, Now What? Why Squares Break Down, if this is what you're looking for, you're in the right room. So we appreciate you coming by. If you have pagers, cell phones, if you'll just turn those off, that would be appreciative. The session will be recorded, so we'll just pass a microphone around. We want your comments, and please, if you do pick up the microphone with a comment, state your name, tell us where you're from, and then the question or comment, okay? This is kind of an extension of what was done last year. It went so well, and there was a lot of good information that came out of it, that we opted that we wanted to do this again and see if we can't expand on what happened and what we discussed last year, and as well as let other folks hear and see what actually went on last year and went on with why squares break down. The panelists here, my name is Tim Marriner. I'll be your moderator. And the panelists were on this session last year. They did a super job, Mr. Mike Jacobs and Mr. Jim Mayo. Let's give them a nice hand, please. So we would like to, I don't know which one of you would like to start off first. Mike? Okay. So we'll start off here. Do you want it to hold questions until after you're through with your discussion? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think this will get discussion oriented. Anyway,
okay,
so.
Very good. That's how it worked.
Yes. We talked last year about what breaks dancers down and what we suspected. It was a variety of things. Now, what do we do about it is the next logical question. And years ago, I remember Lee Cotman always responding to people that had questions about something that was in a weird place and that they didn't really know, is that his response, well, I wouldn't call it from there. Well, so many of us were dissatisfied with that kind of response, that we wanted to be able to know and extend things. And as a result of the hard work of the definitions committee and various program committees of defining material and getting an idea where things go, we no longer do not know where something very difficult ends. We know where it goes and what it goes and what it does. But that may have been Lee's response 30 years ago, and in those 30 years, the dancers really haven't changed that much. They have not put little computer modules on their arms and heads and ears to be able to learn material and do better with it and so forth. We still basically have the same humanity in front of us. Nothing's changed much in the last 10,000 years as far as that goes, which means that even though we may know where it goes now, it doesn't mean that the dancers on the fly are going to be able to function and go to those spots and do those things. And we have now been willing to go where no man has gone before, but unfortunately no one's coming with us. And maybe Lee's answer from 30 years ago is the right one. I wouldn't call it from there. And we no longer think of that as a satisfactory answer, but perhaps at top of the list of handling the difficult material is don't call it from there. It's not appropriate from there. We've had the hardest time of legislating caller judgment at caller schools and colleges and so forth. We've tried to fine-tune judgment out there, but it also seems to be a natural trait of anyone that gets behind the microphone of becoming bored or thinking that the world is bored and wanting to go farther with the material. Jim Mayo at the one-night stand school that's before CALLERLAB that has been going on for the last 5 years, did a session. We had a number of non-callers at the event, and he was introducing Western-style square dancing to the group and had them call. And so this person knew a little bit about dancing, and he said, well, what do you want to do if you want to move the dancers over there? And he carefully crafted all the decisions you had to make in calling a sequence. And the very next sequence out of it was a 12-year-old. He was doing wonderful. And so the very next sequence out of his mouth, he got harder than ever before. I mean, it took one sequence for him to decide to go where no one had gone before. So there is an element in square dance calling that seems to want to go to something different, someplace unusual, someplace that takes a little more gray cells to solve as a problem. The problem is that the dancers may not be interested in that. They've come into dancing for other reasons other than just the choreographic question. They've come into dancing because it provides movement to music. They've come into dancing because they have friends they want to move around and associate with. And there's also the choreographic puzzle. And those three combined make a really good dance atmosphere. When we concentrate on any one of them, by the fact that we're not using the other two, our dance suffers and isn't what it is. And so it is dealing with difficulty. Maybe the first primary thing is you shouldn't be calling it from there. Now, at the same time, there are ways to make a question more interesting, more doable, and more successful. In baseball trivia, there's a question that, if you just ask the question plainly, how many people have received the MVP in back-to-back years? And of course, you know, there is a finite answer to it, and you can go ahead and talk about it and so forth. The way that you can phrase it interestingly is that, and this was 10 years ago though, is that there were 9 players who won back-to-back MVPs, and they fit every spot on the baseball diamond. And so suddenly now there's a clue in the material there that gives you a chance to try to answer it. It suddenly becomes more achievable by being able to put faces and ideas on the spots, and you have hints. You know, you think about, well, who's the most famous first baseman I ever thought of, and so forth. And chances are you might pick him out. And usually the answer is such that you can pick out 5 or 6 of them. Well, 5 out of 6 of 9 makes you feel fairly successful. The first question, you might have picked out 1, and you would have felt very unsuccessful. And so tests tend to test the person giving the test and not the person taking the test. It is the ability of you as a caller to phrase the question right in an interesting manner so that the answer is achievable and not in how well the dancers out in front of you take the test. And so and I think we as callers always fear dancer boredom so much more quickly than it actually exists. And there is also an element, the reason that Broadway dancers and ballet dancers practice routines is so they can look good when they finally perform them. When we're trying for the ultimate in choreography, and I never exposed them to the question before, they're not going to look like they understand what they're doing very well, and their dancing doesn't look well. I think there's nothing wrong with dancer anticipation, because that tells me he's feeling secure about what he's doing, and the dance looks good. There should always be an element in any game. It should be that there's an element, I just had good news. There should be an element in any game of the chance of losing, but nobody plays a game they can't win. I know that I like a lot of strategic games, the computer games, and they're long strategy type things and so forth, and I enjoy doing those. But I never do them at the highest level. I want to do them at a level where I can win. And that's a truism of every single program in dancing from beginners through C4. Even though we think of C4 dancers knowing all these calls and so forth, they don't want to play a game they can't win. In fact, if anything, they're less satisfied when they don't win. And so their expectation is 90% of the material. My expectation may be 70% of the material. Hey, somebody's going to lose here, and I got the microphone. So that means that their level of success needs to match down with what my estimation is around behind the microphone. So if we approach calling to a bunch of beginners or a bunch of new graduates or a mainstream dance or a plus dance, or there has to be some element, agreed upon element of what their expectation of your success is and what your expectation of their success should be. And if they don't agree, there's going to be conflict. And that's really the problem that we face now in modern square dancing, is getting the expectations to match the actualities.
Is this one on? It's on. How about that? I'll use it. Mike has, of course, summarized the situation as he usually does very effectively. I come to this session with a point of view, one that doesn't coincide with the rest of the world all the time. But I would start off with noting that his description assumes that there is going to be some breakdown. And for the last 25 years, I have been operating behind the microphone with the expectation that I would get 100% success on my floor. Now, many of you are going to say, you're dreaming. They ain't never going to happen. And to some extent, you're right. There are usually people at a dance who shouldn't be there, who've come to the wrong dance. And I did decide at some point that I really would exempt them from my calculation. If the people at my dance are not able to do the most vanilla version of the calls on the program at which this dance has been advertised, then they're not in my calculation. But if the people there are all able to do the straight vanilla version properly called successfully, then it's my job to see that they dance, all of them, everything I call, all night long. That's my goal. Do I achieve it? Sometimes. But it's very, very difficult. I would start out with the question to you, how many of you would accept that as your goal? That's a fairly limited share of the crowd. And it's my view that that's one of the problems that has brought modern square dancing to where it now finds itself. We have operated this activity with two conditions. The first is the caller's fear, panic, expectation that dancers will be bored, that they are easily bored, that they that our major job is to keep them, quote, interested. And much of what we have done over the last 25 or 30 years has been directed at resolving, addressing that problem. I don't think it's true. I think that a huge share of the people who have come through our doors have come not with the expectation of being bored, and they have, in fact, never been bored. What we have succeeded in doing with the attitude that we have used in presenting modern square dancing is to filter out of all the people who came through the door those who are interested in being challenged. All the rest we have sent away by over-challenging them. And we've been very effective at doing that. Now, they're not moving. Is that my job? Is that my responsibility? Well, this square's moving. I'll call to them. Is that an adequate response? No, of course not. Well, the front three are moving. Why worry about the back six? In fact, I have watched square dance floors intensely for the last 25 years since I began to discover, and I'll tell you when and how that happened, but how difficult it was to assure dancer success. I've been watching my floor and the floor of a lot of other callers. I find most callers are willing to tell me that it's their job to work for dancer success, and that if half the floor is broken down, half of each tip, that's extreme. That's too much. But I have watched those same callers do exactly that all night long, over and over and over again. I wonder, what is the mismatch? Why is what they believe not taking place in front of them? Some of them, extremely skilled callers who could have kept the whole floor dancing had they set out to do that correctly. One of the things I observed is that the problem came about, intensified, when we began to concentrate on sight calling. Because the sight caller is in constant fear that his floor will break down and he won't be able to get people back. And the way to defend against that is to never take your eyes off your key square. And in fact, that's what happens. Some of the most skilled callers are concentrating entirely on one square. They'll never know what happened back there. They never look. I've seen callers call to one square with 8 squares standing there watching them. And they'll go on for minutes calling to one square. I think we can all agree that that's a mistake. But I see it happen with very respected callers. It's a problem in our activity. If we accept the fact that it's our job to keep the floor moving, the question is, what's it take? A long time ago, Deuce Williams, who some of you may know, came to New England and stayed with me, called a couple of dances. He had a night off, and so he came to my club with me. And I had asked him to call a tip. The call Fan the Top had just come into existence, and Deuce taught my club Fan the Top. It took him about 30 seconds. They all knew how to do Spin the Top. And then he called a tip to 9 squares of my dancers, and every single one of them danced everything he called successfully. I spent the rest of the evening trying to accomplish the same thing, to get my club to dance anything that I called with 100% success. And I didn't even come close. And on the way back to the house, I kind of sheepishly commented on that. He said, of course you couldn't. You're not a sight caller. I said, what does that have to do with it? He said, well, when the square breaks down while you're calling, you have to wait until you get to the end of your module before you can change anything. He says, I changed the next call. And that's when I started learning sight calling. But even then, it requires an attitude which says, I really want my whole floor to dance. And it takes a willingness to see that they're not. That was a long time ago, before we had done much research about what makes things difficult. Since then, John Sobalski has spent some of his employer's time with their permission. They had a 5% research allowance, and he used it to study the factors in square dance difficulty. And this is available in one of the CALLERLAB handouts. I'm not sure which one. But it is a list of what makes things difficult. Pretty obvious things. I'll just run down the list for those who haven't read it recently. Obviously, an unknown call. That's tough. How frequently one is used. Is it familiar? If it's an unfamiliar formation for a call, even if you know the call, or an unfamiliar arrangement, meaning the distribution of boys and girls. If we ask people to remember too much, sometimes we give people a series of calls, and we make them remember one while they're doing another one, or keep track of too much. Asking people to respond as end centers, in phasers, or those who can, all of those things are asking for more than the ordinary bit. Anticipation, forward 8 and back your reel, pass through and bend the line. Misguidance. Smoothness lacking. If you make it just awkward, then that makes it tough. And dancers have a sense of what's right. We need to stick to that or expect that it will be difficult. And if you mix several of these above 9 factors, that too adds to the complication. We need to be conscious of all of those, and we need to understand what each of those does to difficulty and see to it that we don't compound by putting more than those in unless we expect it and take care of them in the process. I have reduced the amount of calling I'm doing. I for many, many years, called somewhere between 150 and 200 nights a year. I'm now down to something like 20. The one thing I worried that I would lose the ability to keep track of choreography or make the dance patterns work, and none of that happened. The thing that I have the greatest difficulty with is managing difficulty. Being sure that I am sure that the people in front of me will be able to succeed with what I call next. That's the skill that goes away if you aren't using it regularly. It's compounded of a whole bunch of things. Timing is obviously one of them. First of all, importantly, seeing whether or not they're succeeding. Seeing a hesitation, an indication that they're going to have trouble with the next call. And if you're skilled, you can then change the next call. Micro-programming. If you aren't using a memorized module, then each call you give is based on a micro-programming decision. You decided before you said it, instantly, whether that's the call to use next. And those decisions can have a huge effect on the success rate. And finally, selection of the words. Putting too many words in increases difficulty. Not using exactly the right word. I have often saved a square or two by delaying a call for a quarter of a second. By adding one word. All of those things. But before you can do any of that, you need to recognize the need to do it and then practice doing it until you get it right. I believe that dancer success is hugely important, and the absence of it has brought us to our knees.
One of the yes.
There's so many little problems that create all this atmosphere. One thing is lining up caller thinking with dancer thinking. That's really hard. I didn't realize that was that hard to say. So caller thinking many times thinks of, well, it's like this, or they think of this and it's equivalent, and they forget that the dancers have a different viewpoint of what they're doing and how they do it. And the result you get is a lot of where the little conflicts happen in the course of people dancing. Chris, can I borrow you a second? Yeah. So if we can get over here facing each other. There is a caller in the New Jersey area, I have yet to track him down, that teaches boxinette that it's just like a star through, except the girl's using the right hand and turn a quarter to face. Okay? Now, so when we normally, see, we're getting the ball and socket hand hold here, which is the really correct way to make boxinette nice and smooth. But his thinking of it being equivalency in his mind, do a star through. See how the hand, look at, and that's her right hand for a star through. She's at least come to that point. But first she's giving me the wrong hand. So what I see in New Jersey is a lot of boxinettes done like this, which on top of it turns all the hands around. Oh, yeah, it looks really good. And so even if I get the boxinette, can I get the star through hand? Even though I get boxinette with right hands, it's still, she's trying to melt and socket, which is the correct way to do it all the time. And so, but this is what I'm seeing, on an action. They'll either give the wrong hand because they know that, or they'll give the right hand, but they're in the wrong position. It's the dancer thinking is fine. It's the caller thinking of equivalence. Somewhere along the line, somebody apparently in all the caller school told you that the less words you use in a teach is better. Not if it doesn't make you understand. And what happens is then that this incapacitates people for dancing to me, that I want to have a good right-hand face so that I can go into the right and left through, or a square through, or a fan the top, or whatever I wanted to do out of that situation. But here their bodies are turned awry, and they can't. In fact, if I use boxing and do a right and left grant, I can't even get them lined up for that. So it's the conception of the caller that is incapacitated the dancer being able to do the call correctly. Turn around and get a mini wave with me here. If you'll imagine two more people for an OSH wave and a recycle, okay. Well, recycle's rule, of course, it really doesn't have any handhold action or anything else along that line. They're doing the fold in behind, we turn in face. Okay, can I get you to turn back again? Okay, so our waves over there. And so we're doing the recycle now, and there have been callers that tell the people that it's the girls you turn back and wheel and deal, which somewhat duplicates the dance action, but really doesn't help the dancer's perception. Now, I had a dancer walk with me, and John Marshall, and if you'll turn back the mini wave, and that she said, "Oh, you change hands on it." And we thought, there's no changing hands to recycle. Yes, there is from her point. Do the recycle action. Look what hand she's holding with me now. It's the left hand. Her thinking's right as far as that she changes hand on the call. Now, it isn't necessarily the rule, but it's her perception of it in the way that she thinks is a thought process. And thank you. And that's what makes the difference in doing the call. And the funny thing, it's true from both the mainstream recycle and the advanced recycle. If you're doing a facing recycle, I turn like this, and she slides over and gets my right hand with her right hand. She's changing hands. So many times dancers come up to you and have weird descriptions of the calls you just taught, or the impression of a call, or anything else. They're usually right, but it's a different set of thinking. And when we're busy cueing the parts that we think they are from the microphone, it's not the way they're thinking on the floor. So cueing doesn't always help. In fact, a lot of times it doesn't. It gets in the way. And particularly if you're under the impression that people will eventually learn the call by the cue, boy, are you wrong. Whatever day you finally decide to take the cue away will be the day they learn the call.
Mm-hmm. I had some dancers come up to me from one of the groups that I call for, and they said, "Oh, we're just fascinated. How can you keep us all moving? How are you keeping us going out there?" And I said, I thought for a little bit, let me get back to you. And then finally I came back to him because I had to start the tip. I came back and I said, "Have you ever seen a school of fish?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, they get to going one way, and then all of a sudden the whole thing, one darts, and they all flip back, and they all seem to flock together, don't they? They mimic, they flock, they're because they want to be something bigger than they are for safety. They flock for safety. And so what I see on the dance floor when I'm calling choreographically is I'm seeing this school, and everybody is going in this rotation, and then the room rotates and goes the other way. And if I'm looking in the center of the room and one fish darts out, I see that. And my eye immediately goes over to that person that's out of sync. And that's the predator. That's the one that's going to get eaten first, right? So I have to say something to get them back into the school, to get back to swimming back with the rest of the group again. If I can't get them swimming, then I'm going to try to form lines so that group can get back into motion again. I've seen rooms with hundreds of squares, and I'm calling away, and I get a nudge from Mr. Darryl McMillan saying, "You lost a square over here." And my eyes did not see that square over here. He saw the entire room. And when we sight call, sometimes we focus on one square. Yes, I say more often it's 1 to 3 squares, and we're just paying attention to that, especially if we're not on a stage. If we have the ability to be on a stage, we can see the whole room better. But you need to look or focus your attention somewhere in the middle of the room where you can see what is happening and all the movement flowing back into. As soon as something goes array, you're going to see it. It's going to happen. So that's the expression, or how I stated that, how I kind of try to keep the floor moving. There was a lot of things that were said up front here that I want to hit to. There's other things. There's the caller and there's the dancer. The caller has the responsibility to keep the floor moving, and the dancer has responsibility to keep the floor moving. You're wondering how so? We mentioned up here knowledge. Knowledge of the caller has of the ability to move the dancers is one thing, and then you also have the dancers' end, their knowledge of understanding and interpreting the calls of how to do it. We're communicating via airways, and a lot of things can happen between this microphone and their ear. When they finally get it to their brain to move it to their feet, a lot of things can happen along the way. If they don't hear the call, that's one problem. And if it's a sound problem, if it's a sounding problem, then we have to correct that. That's one problem. If it's a hearing problem, they need to dance in the front. If they have a hearing problem, if the dancer has a hearing problem, okay, a physical problem, they need to get up front. Or we have hearing enhancement units now. Provide one, and they'll say, boy, if it wasn't for that enhancement unit, I wouldn't even be dancing today. There's one cause and effect between a caller and a dancer. Another thing that we've already talked about is judgment, the degree of difficulty of the choreography. And that has to do in the caller's standpoint of it. In the dancer's standpoint, maybe they've only learned a standard application of a call. And as a leader, when I'm calling to that group, I need to be aware what is standard, and I need to be aware of what degree of difficulty I decide to go on that little journey to expand the envelope, if you will. And then there is a point where you're going to start sacrificing the floor. That's the point where is the judgment that we all seem to have a little degree of difference. I do believe that we want to keep the majority of the floor moving. Sometimes we can't. Sometimes, as Jim said, it's a matter of they don't know the material, so they're not going to count. But now there's sometimes if there's a sequence or a routine or a call that's a particular call, and I notice that they're not getting that particular routine or call, I choose not to call it the rest of the night. My job when I travel is entertainment. My job at home as a area caller is education. So if they're not getting that material, then I'm going to have to take the time to show them, whether it be workshop or we take just a minute. Hey, let me show you. I noticed you guys didn't get that last action. Let me help you with that. Or you go on the floor during the break and show them so that they can get it. If that's going to be the theme for your tip for that rest of the evening, you better show them. Okay, so those are some of the other things. There's a lot of different things. Distractions. The caller has distractions. The dancers have distractions. Language is sometimes a difficult barrier, especially if let's say I'm in Japan and I use the term gentleman. They don't know what gentleman is or are. What they do know is that it's not on the list. They know boys, girls. But if I go over there and I start saying the 4 sexy ones promenade, that's English. It's not on the list. They don't know that. Okay? And they don't need to. But here in the States, we take that for granted. So there is some element of language and understanding of it that can create difficulties on the floors. The other thing I happen to mention is the helper words, which Mike had made a comment about. Too much help, too little help, or delayed help all can hinder and interfere. And I say helper words. They're more like clues where you're trying to get them to get through something, especially if you have new dancers and you're trying to help them or clue them through the steps to give them more positive response in their learning. Those are some of the words we use.
You made a comment about the sound in the back of the hall, and I can't emphasize that enough. At so many of our dances, the sound back there is bad. You know, Jim and I have been talking about this subject for several years, and he was always making point that we abandoned the back of the hall because we were concentrating as sight callers on the front of the hall. I think the back of the hall has a lot more problems than just the fact that they don't get looked at by the caller. I think first off, they miss all the other part of communications that the front squares get to see. Facial things, gestures, things on that line, they're usually not big enough for the back of the hall to see, so they lack the intimacy that the squares up front have. What do you do when people have problems? You encourage the poor dancers to come up front and where you can help them more. So you automatically realize you can't help the back. But the back sound is really bad too. I was at a festival where Tim was one of the 3 callers on staff. And so they were working threesome there, and the back of the hall had a bunch of problems. And there was even once where a really good teen dancer's back there, and they were having problems. Part of it is that the 2 other callers were engaging in comments, but the comments were at such a level they weren't really being heard well in the back. As a result, dancers thought they were missing calls. When you upset them, then they don't really know where they're at, and so they break down, and then once a history of breakdowns occur, you can write off the rest of the tip, unless by some force of nature they get back into the ball game and get a sequence, and that returns their confidence in what's going on. So the way I noticed all this is that in doing some challenge weekends and stuff where they're on numbers, the back of the hall changes every tip. So the best square could just as well be back there as up front. And yet the back of the hall still had problems, which was telling me it was something other than watching them that was the problem. And so, and certainly that's not the exclusive answer. There's all the other factors feeding in too. But the sound back there is bad, and it doesn't allow the intimacy that the front squares get.
I think the most important point that we're making in all of this is that, and perhaps the reason we haven't focused on it as much as we might have, is that no one thing determines whether the floor succeeds. It is a combination of all of these things, and they interact one with the other. One of the observations with the helper words that you mentioned, they can be very helpful to somebody who needs them, but they can also cause a lot of trouble for experienced dancers who think that's a different call. If you've added in an extra helper word, very often the good dancers will treat that as an additional call and go ahead and do it. Right. And so even in the fix, you need to be a little careful. One of the overriding points, my stock in trade, as I have said for a long time, ceased 25 years ago to be choreographic challenge. I decided that wasn't my bag. That's not the product I'm trying to sell. The product I sell to dancers is a very smooth, flowing, well-timed dance. I want most of all to have their feet fit with the music so that they don't have to hesitate. So once I set them in motion, they stay in motion at the same pace without having to make abrupt adjustments. And I decided for myself that the variety in my dance program would come in large part from using all of the terms on whatever program it is, rather than just a few of them. Some callers make variety, challenge, interest by using a few calls in a huge variety of ways. My approach is to use all the calls on the program, and I keep a checklist at any dance and make sure that I have used the entire call list. If it's a plus dance, I'm going to use all the plus calls. If it's a mainstream dance, I'll use all the mainstream calls. That provides all the variety that I think dancers need. The thing that blows me away is dancers come to me time after time after time and say, your mainstream dance is so interesting. Huh? From my point of view, it's straight vanilla. I don't very often use interesting variety, challenging choreography. That's not my stock in trade. What I want to have is the smoothest possible dance. And the hotshot dancers, a few of them, have over the years said, oh, same old thing over and over. But huge numbers of dancers come and say, oh, your mainstream dance is so much more interesting than the other guys. I don't understand that. I don't know why it happens. The only thing I can attribute it to is the fact that I do use the entire program list at every dance.
Fascinating is that round dancers will get on the dance floor and dance Houston over and over and over. This is probably the 300th time they've danced that same routine, and it doesn't matter to them. They get out on the floor, they're going to dance Houston. They're going to dance whatever, New York, New York. And we seem to think that we have to provide them with so much other things, in variety, that really what they're seeking is dance. We have the tendency to over-choreograph at times and take some of the dance out of it. I wanted to go right back into one other thing here about why the dancers or why the squares break down. And I mentioned or alluded to sound. Sometimes it's a mix between the voice and the music. That's a problem. And if you don't have a good mix, the music's too loud, they can't hear the command, then that's a problem. You have to adjust that. And you have to have somebody tell you if it's sound, if the sound is getting in the back. If you round dance, get to the back of the room and see if you can't hear what the leader's saying up front. Then you have an idea what's going on the floor. But another thing happens is fatigue. You have caller fatigue and you have dancer fatigue. The caller is calling away, and they're calling, and after 6 hours, if it's a big festival, or even to the second hour or third hour, depending on the evening of dance, how long, or the length of the dance, whatever, there becomes a mental fatigue. I've called all this material, and I just, the caller gets tired and maybe makes a mistake. There's a fatigue for the caller. There's also fatigue by the dancer. They've been dancing so long and to so many various callers, and maybe to you all night long, that by the end of the evening, fatigue is a factor why squares break down. And there's not only a mental fatigue. If we puzzle them all night long, the mental fatigue increases, and they're to a point where I've had it. All you have to call is flutter wheel, and I'm going to break down. And that happens. And I know callers who play on that to make them break down, too. On a Sunday afternoon, they say heads go up to the middle and back, flutter wheel, which would not normally break a square down on Friday night. But after constant choreography at some higher program, let's say, or maybe just of a degree of increased difficulty within the program, you call something merely basic, and the whole floor is going to falter because they weren't used to hearing that one call. Big example, you just call spin chain through. It's not being heard enough on a floor. You just call spin chain through today, and it's like, all right, there's a little fatigue for that particular call. Also in fatigue, I said there's a mental fatigue. There's a physical fatigue as well, too, the end of a weekend or the end of an evening. So that is something that factors into why squares will break down.
I've considered that I've been calling 35 years. I've considered that I've called one perfect sequence in my life. The way I evaluate that perfect sequence is that night there were 6 squares on the floor. The mix was good enough so the floor was fairly equal. Everybody, I got the feeling, was having a little bit of problem solving when they were doing the sequence, but they were moving through it. When I got to the conclusion at the end, I didn't feel like that they felt that they just got away from the edge of the cliff, didn't survive. At the same time, they felt like it was really interesting and they liked what they were doing, and I had that response from everyone. That's the only perfect sequence. I'm still looking for the perfect wave again. I'm looking for the perfect sequence again because we too often have one square that doesn't get to that point, or we have pushed beyond the degree where it's no longer an enjoyable success. It's that I managed not to fall off the cliff success attitude. And I think we should be looking for that perfect wave, that perfect sequence where where you walk the line between making the dancers interested in what went on and have the dancers feel successful and good about it.
Going back to the fatigue factor, and I wanted to rewind on one thing, is that I've been to dances where the callers have been barking all night long at them. And by the end of the night, the ear fatigue, they're tired. They can't, it's just been, they've been barked at or hollered at or in a sense yelled to command-wise that one more and they're not going to hear it. And so there is a situation that occurs too where they just get tired. They're just tired of being, there's no, if you don't provide variety, if you don't do some softness and do some stuff and hard stuff and softness, that there's a situation that can occur where they get tired of hearing the same sound, the same voice, or the same instrumental. Let's say everything you do is banjo picking all night long. They get tired of that. And sometimes that can create a factor where it becomes a distraction enough that they can miss a call or they will break down. What we'd like to do is try to get you all to interact with us a little bit. If you have some questions, please state your name and we'll pass this microphone around. And if you'll pass it amongst yourselves and we'll get this underway.
We had a situation, Chris Day from Manchester, England. We had a situation where we couldn't work out why the dancers were not in the time with the caller. And what we didn't realise, that we clapped our hands and it was bouncing off the wall 6 times. So they were getting it on the coming back. So therefore they were not in time with the caller. They were way behind. Another question. When you've got your 3 squares that are still dancing and all these people that have broken down, how are you getting your dancers back dancing? How are you getting them back dancing within, say, 6 moves? Are you making lines, or are they going to drop back into squares? And in a huddle, how are you doing that? You want to get them dancing.
This has been a pet peeve of mine since we have instituted Jack Leslie's idea about reforming lines. I think it put a gun in our hands and we continue to gun the dancers down. It left the implication that it was okay for you to go on in your calling of a particular sequence, and just because the floor has started moving again by getting back in lines doesn't mean they're going to have a successful route. It just simply means that we're going to conclude a sequence, and a lot of people are going to forget they broke down, and as a result, wonder why they were all wrong when they were done. And so at nowhere did they get a successful carrot reward at the end of the sequence because they didn't get anything. They don't understand why they broke down. They don't understand anything. The thing to do when more people have broken down is resolve the square. And you must learn to resolve the square quickly and effectively and not do a 15-call routine that finally gets you to the point where you can spot the correct couple you want on the end of the line and then finally do your get out. That is crisis-oriented calling, and it is the worst excuse for sight calling that I know of. You know, that we really multiplied the problem by telling people to get into lines and get caught back up that way. I think it's better calling and a better strategy is to resolve the square as quickly as possible and reapproach the problem. It's that if they all broke, then you got a problem with that particular call. So you either need a way to reattempt the problem, find easier ways to start to solve it, or do something else that will let them learn.
Did that answer your question? Sorry.
In England, we encourage them to get into lines, and we say within 6 moves, and we'll say normal lines go forward and back. And that is an easy get out for the caller, and it's easy for the dancers just to get dancing, and then we'll analyse it later.
I have a different approach. My whole philosophy toward calling is don't break them down. Do not do choreography that is going to cause that breakdown. If you lost 5 out of 10 squares or 3 out of 6, you made a mistake in choosing your choreography. You just plain shouldn't go there. You should never get there. You do not need to challenge dancers that much.
Okay, Ron Marcus from Tucson, Arizona. A comment about the clue words and cue words, that sort of thing. I found myself over the last, well, maybe 10, 15 years ago, using too many. And just recently, and I weaned myself away from that, except when it's absolutely necessary, certainly in teaching situations. clue words and cue words, and then eventually you sort of drop them out of your vocabulary as you're calling. During a teaching thing, that's okay, but dancers have come up to me. There was one thing that I just kept on saying, and it was, I would say, calling the plus program, I would say, spin chain the gears. No exchanging, just spin them. And everybody went, are we doing spin chain or spin chain exchange? And I said, okay, that's too many helper words, you know, and it goes back to something we use in our color schools, that too much of a good thing is just that, too much. Helper words are good, but sometimes it's too good.
Well, and we do it under the best intentions. It is not that you're doing it to challenge or clobber the dancer. You're doing it to help them. But we all fall into the trap. I stopped using take a peek and trade the wave, and I've stopped using other cues, and they finally do learn the call. But at the same time, in the course of my beginner's lessons right now, I haven't got a call called Wheel and Deal from lines facing out. I got a call called Who's the Right-Hand Couple. And I don't have a call called Bend the Line. I have a call called Where's the Center of the Line? And so what I think that I'm doing to help things has actually created a problem in learning the name of the call and responding to it. So no matter what reason or rationale you have for using a cue, it isn't really good to do it in any consistent way, because you get in the way of them learning the name of the call.
You know, we also have an expectation of the dancers that they should know all the material. And we try to make them equate what we know, that they should know, not only should they know all the material, but they should know all the material that we know. And it's not going to happen. That's why we're callers. We found it intriguing. We liked the puzzle we got up here because we wanted to do more about it. And the situation is these folks are out there. They're going to dance. They're going to dance them from a standard application, or maybe a little more, depending on your ability to educate them in that region or area. And you have to live with that. When I go overseas in places along that line, we know that they do a little more than standard applications in some regions. Okay. I also have to be aware that when I come back to another area, that I have to be certain to readjust my timing and situation, because I know that in my home group, they're not dancing all those positions that I can call when I go to different places. Okay, and it's just one of the situations. It's a new club. It's an older age group, and they're happy with doing them just one particular way and moving, and I'm very happy to call to them in that manner. So that's one of the other aspects of it. Any more comments, questions, or?
Go ahead.
Your comment about people going to lines when they break. My name is Bill Varley. First time here at the convention and just starting to learn to call. I've been very interested in teaching dancers over the years, and found learning to dance very interesting by the definitions of the calls and that type of thing. The instructor that I had taught us that when we broke, to go into lines, and taught the dancers certain strategies for handling that situation. Maybe I missed something, but I don't think I heard anybody talk about that in terms of part of our instructional responsibility.
See, I still feel that it's far better for you to resolve the square and start over, as opposed to them getting into a line of four. First off, if you can return it to the point where you're back in a regular zero line, then there isn't any point why you shouldn't go two steps further and resolve the square. Okay? If you're just simply going back to a line of four where the girls on the right and the boys on the left, that means that those that did it and got back into it that way will not have a successful conclusion at the ending. So if you think the principle of dancing is just moving around together with the same music and the same formations, then they've had a successful sequence. But then why do we expect and encourage a response to the element left or the right and left grand or whatever with a big celebration? It must be because we want to get to the end of the game right as opposed to wrong. So I've got a chance by going back to the beginning much more quickly by just simply resolving the one I was on and returning to stuff. then I can at least try to give them a list of 50% success rate between the sequence that failed and the sequence I'm going to help them succeed on. So, and that means that I will exit people off the floor with at least a 50% success rate as opposed to 0.
That's his explanation of why he doesn't depend on it. But a whole lot of callers do, and so in teaching, it is, of course, wise to tell the dancers that some callers expect this and teach them the technique. But I share his view that better still, never make them need it. If I'm the caller, I don't care whether they know that or not, because that's not where I'm going. But as a teacher, absolutely. It's one of the things that dancers are expected to know, and we surely ought to teach them.
One of the things that I do stress when I teach is I want the squares, I want the dancers to look up and be aware of formations that are around you and other squares and other sets that are around you too. And I teach this at our beginners, or the new dancers. And I want them, I don't want them to give up and just make lines, because that's not the answer. If I see that a group or this one fish is out of sync, they're out of sync in one box or one wave. If I can continue to call wave things and they can fumble back into a wave, then we're all back swimming again, you see? But if they are totally out, and I decide that being that this one dancer is out up here and they're in a wave, and I call all 8 circulate, now the whole square is gone. Or I call couples circulate, the whole square is gone. At best, I had one dancer out. And if I get them to a standard box formation or a line in that one group, they could have found the empty spot and got back into dance. Okay, that's one thing. I can see it. I can put them back into a box. If I ignore that fact and call a couple circulate or something that mixes the whole square, now I have that a complete square broke down. So my responsibility is to try to get them back to a formation they can get into first. If they can jump into the box or the wave or the line quick, fine. Okay? If they can't do that, then I'll have them go back and form this line. My responsibility is, if I can get to a 0 line, or a slotted line or what have you, real quick, I'll do that so they can get back to dancing. But it does me no good to call a continuation of 15 or 18 more sequence from there even. I want them to find get the carrot, as Mike says, and do either a quick get out to get back to dancing, so that the next sequence they can all start on the downbeat together.
And that's exactly what I mean by micro-programming, that as you're calling, you've got the fish out of line to be able to adjust the next call so that you don't cause this, you don't accentuate the mistake and complicate it even further, means that you need to be conscious with every single call you make of what it's doing to the success rate on the floor.
The name's Al Roth from Lawrence, Massachusetts. I just wanted to comment that maybe CALLERLAB needs to rethink a document that they have published that's intended to be a recommended practice for dealing with this exact situation. And what that practice is supposed to be is that the square that breaks down, they all immediately go to their home position. The head couples slide to the right and align themselves with the side couples, and then the caller is supposed to dance the square into a matching 0 line. And then now he has everybody back in sync and continue the dancing. But none of you folks seem to be advocating that we teach the dancers how to do that and use that as a standard practice.
Well, I do. Yeah, I do.
And that is in the CALLERLAB documents,
yes,
on the website.
It is. It's a good practice. There are other ways, too, though, Al. We can get them in sometimes quicker. That is a recommend. If the square breaks down and it's beyond belief, and beyond repair, I do believe that they can go back and make this squared set and make slide to the right and make your lines. And I have the responsibility to either resolve the square ahead of time and they're close to home anyway, they can circle an 8th and they're home, or I can say now everybody's in lines, move forward and back, and we're all back dancing again. But I still think there's a bit of recovery that can occur before we get to that point. And that's what I think we were discussing.
Yeah, and I certainly agree with the concept in teaching it, because a lot of callers will have to use it. But I hope it will never be necessary for me to use it, because I don't want to break down squares. And so I'm going to do everything in my power, including all the things that Tim has just mentioned, to avoid the need to use it. But yes, I agree with it as something to be taught and as a tool that other callers will use, because a huge share of callers are not able to do what we're talking about, either to keep the floor dancing or to micro-program so that they can pick up a weak square.
And what it does is encourages the run-on sequence. Square dancing is a language. Like all other languages, the sentence has to be of a size enough to be able to be understood as a compact idea. If you go beyond that range, no one follows the idea or the process. There was a book that came out several years ago, an atrocious thing. It was 200 pages, and it was one paragraph. And that was it. And the sentence went on pages, and it didn't communicate well because too many factors were going on. And unfortunately, you know, in a perfect world, yes, it'd be great they went back to 0 lines and you completed it quickly, but that's not what happens. What happens is that we get a square that may have broken down twice during the setup, got back in lines, get back functioning again, and the sequence has gone on to the 60 and 70 call range. It doesn't surprise me to go out to nationals and so forth and hear over 100 calls in a sequence. It is like Moses wandering in the desert with the Israelites for 40 years. And so that's not good for dancing in any way, shape, or form. What I want to encourage is get back to home and start over again.
Yeah, or in addition to.
Gary Felton, Maryland. One of the callers earlier in the day made a point that when you get into a sequence, get through it and get out quickly, there's a celebration. So if I'm going to call a 6-minute tip at most on a stage with 100 squares in front of me, and it's the only tip I'm going to call for the whole weekend, I want them in and out fast so they can celebrate 6 times, not one celebration. And so that argues for the short tips that have one little cute tweak in it and we're done, so that we don't have to even to think about the times for having lines. If I want to succeed.
Right behind you.
Tom Sellner from Maryland. We've been talking about club dances or open dances. How about if you have a class? Class people are going to tend to break down because they weren't there last week, or they're not getting, your teach was pretty good, but it wasn't good enough to get them through. So how differently do you approach the breakdown problem when you have classes?
If when I'm teaching a class the floor breaks down, I have made a big mistake. I would never tolerate, I would stop the floor entirely. I would pick up that square. In a teaching situation, my 100% rule is reinforced over and over. I do not tolerate breakdowns in a class.
Classes are not mini dances. Classes are classes. And now there's the other extreme. I just heard of a guy that was doing a class and he never used any music the whole dance. He drilled them and walked them the whole time. I guess square dancing must be great without the music. And so this is, I mean, yes, you want some element of understanding the principle of the game of square dancing, but in no way should they ever come up with the wrong answer. When they teach kindergartens and first graders, they don't tend to make their tests be like tests. They end up having tests where everyone's successful. And that's the approach you should take to beginner's lesson. You're teaching the beginning of a language, and so you shouldn't expect them to be able to read a book at the end of the night of lessons.
Great. Folks, is there any more discussions or questions or about what we were discussing here with squares breaking down? Anything like that? One thing I would like to add before we stop is that there is what we were just discussing. One of the things that we're discussing is there's a critique sheet in your packets to please fill them out. If you have any comments or anything along that line regarding anything, they're being read right? And reviewed, and all those suggestions go into the betterment of our next conventions and upcoming and future conventions. Again, I want to thank Mike, and I want to thank Jim for their time and everything here. But if we have more questions, don't want to stop early, but it didn't look like we're... Yeah, but we can, whatever you like to do. Anybody? No more questions?
Can I finish my presentation? Can I get a square, please? Can I get a square, please? Yeah, there's usually more couples than that. Traditionally, it's an even number. Yeah. The one thing I was kind of hesitant to do, but I still think we need to do it since we're talking about how we solve the problem, is I didn't want to encourage stuff done from certain positions, because there are things, I think, that even though the call combination may be from a particular program, it has no business being used in that manner at that program. And it can be used somewhere else along that line. All the heads lead to the right. Now, one way to elevate the ideas and problems that you want to try to produce for the dancer there so they can solve it is this, we've heard commonly used, is everybody do the center's part of load the boat. The problem is that the position we have you in here right now doesn't make it feel like the center's part of load the boat that you normally dance. Even though the position you're looking at is the common user-friendly spot of the girl on the guy's right and so forth, that's not where the center's part of load the boat is performed from. Everybody sashay. Yeah, just change spots. There you go. So where we really do the center's part of load boat from is where the couples are sashayed in the center. That's in normal lines, the couples in the center in their relationship are sashayed. So if you want to ask them to do the center's part of load the boat in each box, then we give you a place where it feels like you're doing the center's part of load the boat. Each box of 4 do the center's part of load the boat. Pass through, face out, pass through. Pass through. That's wait. See the problem? Starting? Yeah. Okay. Now, they've gone on and completed while I'm still trying to help this poor lady that's lost. Okay? And so losing control is the worst thing possible. Turn back and face out like you were. Good. Everybody partner trade. Good. Star through. Do a right and left through. And everybody roll away. Good. So when we do the center's part of the load, yeah, I'll help you. Okay. So it's pass through. So pass through, you pass. Face out. Look at me. Partner trade. And then pass through. So that's what happens in the center's part of the load boat. And that made it feel like the center's part. Now, watch what happens when I do one thing different. Everybody bend the line. Do a right and left through. And everybody roll away. So I've got them with the sachet couples and so forth, so that should work really well. All I've done is turn it 90 degrees. Wrong. Because in the other spot, there was a natural inclination to turn the correct way when they faced out. Everybody do the first part, which is pass through. Now, when they face out, they got to face out away from their box. So for the lady and gentleman in the middle, it doesn't feel like they're turning out. It feels like they're turning in because they end up seeing somebody. And so turn this way, and you turn that way. Good. Per the correct way. Turn that way. That's it. Good. So, and then everybody partner trade, and then everybody pass through. The temptation in the middle is not to face the correct direction, but to face the other way, because that has more out feeling than the other spot did. So it just simply turning it 90 degrees can compound the felony and make the call that much harder to be able to dance. Everybody trade by. Good. Everybody step to a wave. Linear cycle. It's a call that's easy for them to do. Good. Pass the ocean. Everybody spin the top. Good. Everybody swing through. I've still got 2 regular ocean waves here, but watch what happens. Linear cycle. It doesn't feel right. Only because I changed it 90 degrees. I didn't do anything sashayed. I didn't do anything left-handed. I complicated the situation by simply rotating the setup 90 degrees from where they're normally used to doing it from. That's adding difficulty, and we don't understand that that's difficult. We tend to take the caller's viewpoint is that, oh, it's an ocean wave's an ocean wave. What's the problem? Well, there is a problem because it doesn't feel anything like how the call felt before. And when we added it in that way, we added to the degree of difficulty. We tend to think that adding difficulty or difference is by going to left-hand setup, by doing things sashayed. Many times the difficulty is just by turning the setup 90 degrees different than what it originally looked like.
One of the things, too, when we're discussing the degree of difficulty as affecting how a square breaks down, it's not just in plus. It's also right here at mainstream. Everybody slide through, please. And basics, rather. If I teach right and left through, this is where I would teach it from. Right here. I'm teaching right and left through. So everybody shake right hands, pull by, extend, shake left hands, reach behind, do your left action, wheel around, and there you are. And that's not exactly how I would teach it, but I'm telling you that I would show it from lines. But everybody slide through. From here, right and left through, all of a sudden is another animal. Not because I've rotated it, but because the people coming into the center have people coming at them directly, and they think, I need to courtesy turn the one in front of me, not the one beside me. Right? So let's do a right and a left through. And oftentimes we have to anticipate that that's going to be a mistake. And so when we teach, we have to emphasize that ignore the other half of that set or square when we do this, because I want to have them have success. But the third animal that a lot of us forget, everybody pass the ocean, please, is when we do a right and a left through from a wave, now we have compounded it 3 times. There's a right and a left through action from here is totally different too. And if we've not taught them right and a left through from a wave, and all of a sudden we get to spin the top, and we have no get out, and so now we have to teach right and a left through as a get out from a wave, now I have compounded the difficulty of the teach spin the top with them not understanding what right and left through is from a wave. So, and what the reason is because the lady has her left hand being held by another lady with a left hand. Normally they pull right hands by, reach across and shake left hands with the partner and be courtesy turn. They're already using the left hand, so they, in fact, have to use the left hand twice when we do a right and a left through from here. And that's not our normal right, left thing.
And before you do the right and left through from here, I want you to notice this tidal wave. I got one almost hands up here, and I've got loose hand hold, but at least it's on an even term, and this was sagging more when I was over here earlier. And so, now my question to you is are you in the handhold grip because you're expecting his right and left through? Okay, there's where you normally dance with your hands. And so that's fine. And so these handholds lend themselves to the right and left through. Mm-hmm. That one doesn't.
Right.
Okay. If it was hands up, it would be a foreign start to the handhold of the right and left through. Mm-hmm. Okay. And if they're in a forearm grip, for instance, where I was from originally, Louisville was a forearm grip part of the world. And so that's certainly harder to imagine visualizing doing a right and left through from there.
Right, right.
Yes.
So just do your right and left through then, please. Pull by. Notice the lady, and you have to explain that to newer dancers, that the ladies are having to let go of that left hand, reach behind the lady that's beside you. And no other time do they have to worry about the person that's beside me when they do a right and left through. They're usually not there, let alone if you try to load the boat from the wave action. And I noticed the back half of the wave, they were shoulder to shoulder wave, but up here they had staggered and made a nice ripple out of that wave. So we have to be aware as teachers when we teach the compounding difficulties of each call from the arrangement and formation that we actually do teach that in.
Let me add just one supplement to Mike's demonstration on the load the boat. He started out by setting people up in lines or boxes, and then did the half sachet. But a a lead-in, if you've got dancers who have not experience with that kind of thing, is to let them experience the center's part by itself first, before you ever get to the stage that he was in. And the way to do that is to say, from here, just the centers go forward and back. Now, the centers only do your part of Load the Boat, and that will let them experience it in a familiar setting before you ask them, now, ends, do your part. If you separate it that way, you have led them into what you're about to do.
Actually, I might have even gone earlier and had the ends do their part of Load the Boat. They see it cleaner, they tend to do it easier, and I'd have had the head, the center square through 4 or something else along that line, so that I at least get them to the idea of separating the two parts, and that it's not simultaneous. And so there's a long setup before I finally get to what I consider the ultimate problem to be.
And taking off on Tim's talk about the right and left through, if you'd square your set, please. Well, pick one.
One square.
Doesn't matter. If I have, and I discovered this as recently as a decade ago, teaching kids in school. I taught a high school class. And I taught them right and left through. I had the heads do a right and left through, and then the sides do a right and left through. And the inclination is then to have the head step forward and face their corner. And now I'm going to do the right and left through. Heads, would you do that? Step forward and face your corner. And do the right and left through. And if I now from here ask them to do another right and left through, as the heads go into the center, the easiest person for them to reach is their original partner, who's coming at them from across the square. And they will every single time try to turn that person. You need to be, it's a lot easier to teach this action if before you started this setup, you had the head ladies chain. Then when they come from this situation, the one they want to turn is beside them instead of across from them.
A lot of the clue words we use is, and be sure to reach and courtesy turn your partner. Well, the partner's in front of me, in their eyes.
That's the one I know.
Wow.
Joe Casey from Dover, New Hampshire. Would you square your square, please? And this is the way that I would approach doing just the center part of Load the Boat. Heads roll away with a half sachet, go up to the middle and back that way. Do the center's part of Load the Boat. Do an element left with your corners off.
Yep, taking it a step as we go. I was in a situation where sometimes it's not your fault. And I was at a work. I was calling away. We were at a workshop, and we were paired up with another caller. The caller had them in a wave. He called split motivate. And the whole floor did it. Didn't cue it. It was not, this was an advanced floor. This was an advanced dance. And he just called it, split motivate. I said, wow. They know split motivate. And so my turn to call right next, as we're passing the mic back into my turn, I said, okay, this is workshop. He didn't do a teach, and I had somebody else and I got him into another formation. I called split motivate, and the whole floor broke down. He said, what are you calling? I said, you just called split motivate. Yeah, but only if the heads go in and square through 4 and get to the wave. Well, I didn't know the rules.
Everybody with your partner promenade. Show yourself. You didn't do it as good. Oh, you're still promenading. I thought we'd normally go home, but, you know. Hey, nothing's going to happen right this second. Now, the first one was actually the one that I thought we weren't going to get, which is really bad. The second round, the square, I finally got the promenade I thought you were all going to do, where everybody was fairly tight to the center. And that's the proper way to promenade. The promenades we tend to get, particularly in beginner's lessons, are far more erratic and certainly much more spread out. Now, in the course of doing a beginner party, I don't bother about that. And I realize then that I have to have a much shorter figure on paper because they're going to need all kinds of extra beats of music to promenade home. But somewhere along the line in the course between when you finally get them to promenade right and their very first lesson, you're going to have to survive with singing call patterns and approaches that don't meet the timing chart. They meet extra beats of music to promenade home. But somewhere along the line in the course between when you finally get them to promenade right and their very first lesson, you're going to have to survive with singing call patterns and approaches that don't meet the timing chart. They meet their timing chart, which is a lot longer to do. Watch again. Everybody promenade, but let's promenade with a big hole in the square. And sometimes it doesn't even approach a circle, which we haven't gotten out. Wonderful. Thank you all. And so, and frankly, my beginner's lesson group are even farther out at times. You know, it is, they've got the luxury of having a wood floor in the middle of their huge auditorium room, and they tend to, try to use as much of that as possible. And so, you know, those are little strategy factors that we don't address and think about. But that's how we have to think about, you know, if you go into the dance with a prearranged figure for the singing call, it probably doesn't get danced well and deteriorates certainly as it goes through the tip. And that's because even if you get them through the figure in the amount of time, their promenade takes much longer to do, which as a result is when you start the next figure, you're in 2 to 3 beats into the next measure of it, and you lose it.
You know, this is a funny story. Dancers understand why squares break down. I found that out at this one particular weekend. I was calling away, and nobody do-si-doed. They did this little swing and sway thing. They did this little swing and sway. And this was at a new dancers hall even. I'm thinking, they must teach swing and sway for new dancers. I don't know what that is. And I got off the stage area, and I was during the break, and I was kind of talking to somebody, and he said, "No, we don't do-si-do here." I said, "Why don't you do-si-do? What's the problem with the dance action do-si-do?" He says, "Well, by the time we have finished the do-si-do, the caller has called 2 or 3 things we can't catch up. So they've learned the shortcut so that would prevent them from breaking down." So the dancers are pretty well aware of clip timing, and they do shortcuts to eliminate the breakdown. Another thing that they do is this little left twirl, which was their version of a swing, because the caller clip timing so much, or the callers in the region clip timing so much, that they do the little left twirl because they can't swing anymore, because we've used a sequence or dance figure in a 64-phrase piece of music that was probably 72 beats to actually dance it, if we're lucky. And so they learned that I don't have time 4 or 8 beats to swing. I have to get back home so I can get the next sequence underway. So they're going to clip it. They're going to do something to catch up. They're going to do that little twirl rather than do-si-do or swing. Or
okay, I'm on this the load the boat thing. That basically it was set up the way you said for everybody to do the sentence part of load the boat was set up to be for success. And one of the things I do is with load the boat is I tell the people when I'm teaching it. This is somewhat off the subject, but when I teach load the boat in our plus class, I tell them the pass through is not really a pass through. It's maybe you pass by 2 or 3 inches, and that's about as far as you'll get. I ask them to visualize to go through the business of rolling around each other's shoulders, so that you never really get that far away from the person you're dealing with. Because if we could have a line of 4. And then just the center 4, if we do our part of load the boat, okay, but we're not ever really going to pass by. If you do a normal pass through, you'd be maybe a foot and a half away from the person behind you. But if you're doing the center part is load the boat, you want to be very, very close to the person so you don't lose track of them. And I just ask them to do this. When they do just the center 4 people, we'll do the center part of load the boat. We'll start the pass through, and they say as soon as you hit that person's shoulder, that's when you turn out. Now you're real close to the person you're working with. You can can do a partner trade. You've got to keep a real close track of them, and then you can do the pass-through after that. Because this way, if you know, again, back to the lines we were in, if you get back to normal lines again, if you do a pass-through, let's do it. We'll do a pass-through, okay? Pass-through and quarter out. Well, next thing you do is a partner trade. Oh, over here, yeah. So if you keep each other close to each other like that, you don't have a tendency to get lost. So that's another set it up so it'll be successful.
I think that's really very good because, and that affects a lot. That affects calls all the way down the slide through. It is, we say that it's a pass through, but they make such a bigger action out of what they're doing and where they're going than it is really necessary to be. And what happens then is that suddenly more positions start to show up than you ever existed or thought existed, and the dancers really don't have any sense of where they be. It tends to start being wander around the middle until it feels good. And I've seen many more load the boats done like that than done like you've done. And so that kind of contact, it is, I mean, one of the reasons why we get descriptions of slide-throughs like a star-through without any hands or partner trades like a California tour without hands is that ultimately we want them that close that those handed calls gave in their proximity to each other, but unfortunately we're not getting them on the non-handed calls.
Good. Good. You through with the dancers?
Yeah.
Then? Dancers, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Folks, we hope that you've taken some ideas of why squares break down, and just by you coming here, we hope that you are more aware of why squares break down to hopefully eliminate that from happening in your groups or the groups that you're calling for. And so we thank you for your time. Again, we want to thank the panelists for being here, and enjoy the rest of your convention this evening. There's a lot of dancing going on. Fill out the critique sheets and hand them in, because we do read all